There is a moment early in Shoe Dog where Phil Knight walks into a small shoe company in Kobe, Japan. He is 24 years old, fresh out of Stanford Graduate School of Business. He has no business and no product. He has no inventory, no employees, no customers, no investors. What he has is a pitch he rehearsed on the plane and a name he invents on the spot when the Japanese executives ask which American company he represents. He tells them he represents Blue Ribbon Sports. The name comes, he later writes, from the blue ribbons hanging in his childhood bedroom, won at track meets. There is no Blue Ribbon Sports. There is a young man in a borrowed suit, lying to a foreign supplier, hoping a handshake will hold up long enough to make the lie true. That scene is the founding myth of Nike. It is also the part of Shoe Dog that distracts most readers from what the book is actually about. This is the founder's bookshelf. One book a week, one sharp take, no fluff. If that sounds like your kind of channel, the subscribe button is your friend. Shoe Dog was published in 2016 when Phil Knight was 78 years old. By then, Nike had a market capitalization in the hundreds of billions of dollars. Knight had been one of the wealthiest people in America for decades. The memoir, which he worked on across several years, was a late career reckoning. It is not a triumphalist business book. It is closer to a confession. The reception was unusual for the genre. Bill Gates put it on his annual reading list. It became, more or less overnight, the business memoir that founders quoted each other. And like most things founders quoted each other, the parts that get quoted are the easy parts. The crazy idea, the trip to Japan, the waffle iron in Bill Bowerman's kitchen. But step back and ask what the business world in 2016 was actually hungry for. It was the height of the unicorn era. Venture capital was abundant. The dominant founder story was Silicon Valley. Companies raised tens of millions of dollars before they had a product. The cultural narrative around starting a company had become, essentially, the pitch deck and the seed round. Into that environment, Knight published a book about a company that nearly went bankrupt every single year for the first 16 years of its life. A company that could not get a bank loan worth the name. A company whose founder did not raise venture capital because in 1964, in Portland, Oregon, there was no such thing to raise. A company that survived not because of a clever product, but because Knight figured out over and over which counterparty was willing to extend him credit when no American institution would. Most readers came to Shoe Dog expecting an origin story about vision. What Knight actually wrote was an origin story about capital, about cash flow, about the specific Japanese trading house that effectively financed Nike for nearly a decade, and the moment that relationship almost ended the company. The conventional reading of Shoe Dog is that it is a book about following your crazy idea. The actual book is something more uncomfortable. It is a book about how a chronically undercapitalized distributor survived long enough to become a brand because someone outside the American banking system was willing to bet on him. That is the thesis of this video. Nike was not a triumph of passion, it was a triumph of supplier financing. And the founder lesson most readers skip is hiding in plain sight, in the chapters everyone calls boring. The part of Shoe Dog everyone remembers is the crazy idea. Knight is at Stanford writing a paper in a class on small business. The thesis is straightforward. Japanese cameras have displaced German cameras in the American market. The same thing could happen with running shoes. Adidas and Puma dominate. They are German. Japanese factories with lower labor costs and a hungry export economy could undercut them. Someone needs to be the American distributor. The paper becomes the plan becomes the trip becomes the company. It is a beautiful narrative arc, and it is the part of the book that gets cited in every retrospective. But look closely at what the crazy idea actually was. It was not, I will invent a better shoe. It was not, I will build a brand. It was a distribution arbitrage. Knight saw a price-quality gap between Japanese manufacturing and the German shoes selling in American stores. He proposed to be the middleman. For the first decade of Blue Ribbon Sports, that is exactly what he was. He bought shoes from Onitsuka, the Japanese maker of Tiger running shoes, and he sold them out of the trunk of his car at track meets in the Pacific Northwest. This is the first place the standard reading gets it wrong. The crazy idea was not visionary, it was clever. There is a difference. A vision says, I see a future no one else sees. A clever idea says, I see an inefficiency that someone can exploit, and that someone might as well be me. Knight had a clever idea. The vision came later, and it came from other people. What the framework actually rests on is something Knight does not quite name. It is the assumption that distribution is a defensible business. In 1964, in the American shoe market, it was. Manufacturers in Japan had no infrastructure to sell directly into the United States. There were no overseas branch offices. There were no e-commerce platforms. There was no global logistics network. If a Japanese factory wanted to reach an American customer, it needed an American partner. Knight became that partner. But the framework presupposes something the book never makes explicit. It presupposes that the manufacturer cannot or will not eventually cut out the distributor and reach the customer directly. And one of the great tensions of the first half of Shoe Dog is that Knight understands, in some part of his mind, that Onitsuka can do exactly this whenever it wants. The relationship is an unstable equilibrium. The distributor's leverage decays in real time as the manufacturer learns the American market. This is what readers miss in the Crazy Idea chapter. The idea was not the strategy. The idea was the entry point. The actual strategy, the one Knight had to invent on the fly, was how to graduate from being a distributor into being something else, before the manufacturer made him obsolete. The whole rest of the book, in a sense, is about that transition. And the moment it happens, the moment Blue Ribbon Sports stops being a distributor of Tiger shoes and starts being Nike, a maker of its own shoes, is not a moment of triumph. It is a moment of necessity. Knight does not become a brand because he wants to. He becomes a brand because his supplier is about to cut him off. The chapter most readers skim is the one where Knight talks about Nisho Iwai. It is not a single chapter exactly. The Nisho Iwai relationship threads through the middle third of the book. It does not get the dramatic billing of the Onitsuka split, or the customs battle, or the eventual public offering. It reads, on first pass, like accounting. Letters of credit, trade financing, documentary collections. The kind of language that makes a memoir reader's eyes glaze. But the Nisho Iwai relationship is the load-bearing wall of the entire Nike story. Without it, there is no Nike. Not a smaller Nike, no Nike at all. Here is what was happening. By the early 1970s, Blue Ribbon Sports was growing faster than its capital base could support. The pattern was brutal and consistent. Knight would place an order with his Japanese suppliers. The shoes would ship. The shoes would arrive in the United States. The shoes would sell. Knight would book the revenue. And then, 6 weeks later, a new and larger order would come due, and the cash from the previous sale was not enough to cover it. This is the classic working capital trap of a growing distributor. You are profitable on paper. You are broke in your bank account. Every dollar of growth makes the gap wider, because every dollar of growth requires more inventory to be financed before it sells. American banks in this era hated this profile. Knight describes, with what reads like genuine residual fury, a series of meetings with the Bank of California in which his loan officers warn him repeatedly that his growth is dangerous. They want him to slow down. They want him to hold more cash. At one point, the bank effectively freezes him out, and Knight is left scrambling to make payroll. He is, by every conventional measure, insolvent for several days running. What saved him repeatedly was Nisho Iwai. Nisho Iwai was one of the great Japanese trading houses, what the Japanese called Sogo Shosha. These companies do not really exist in the American economy. They are not banks. They are not investment funds. They are vast trading conglomerates that finance the movement of goods across borders. Nisho Iwai's role with Blue Ribbon Sports was, in effect, to put up the working capital that Knight could not raise from American banks. Nisho Iwai would arrange letters of credit. Nisho Iwai would finance the inventory in transit. Nisho Iwai would, at the most dangerous moments of the company's cash flow cycle, simply absorb the float. This is not a footnote. This is the entire reason Nike exists. Without a foreign trading company willing to extend credit that no American institution would touch, Blue Ribbon Sports would have failed in the mid-1970s, the way thousands of other growing import businesses failed in that era. And here is the part that most operator readers miss. Nisho Iwai was not a bank. The relationship was not a loan. It was a counterparty relationship with a foreign partner whose interests aligned, for a period of years, with Knight's survival. Nisho Iwai made money on the trade financing. Nisho Iwai made money on the movement of goods. Nisho Iwai had its own reasons to want Blue Ribbon Sports to keep growing. The relationship worked because both sides were getting paid, and because the trading house operated on a different time horizon and a different risk model than any American lender Knight could have approached. The lesson here, the one the book demonstrates without quite stating, is that the most important financial relationship in a founder's life is rarely with a bank. It is with a counterparty, a supplier who extends terms, a customer who pays early, a partner whose balance sheet you can borrow against in 100 small ways without ever calling it a loan. Knight survived because he found one such counterparty and built a relationship with it that lasted a decade. The American business literature on Nike, almost without exception, glosses over this. Because it is unsexy, because it is technical, because it does not fit the founder mythology. But it is the actual answer to the question of how Nike survived. For all of its strengths, Shoe Dog is a book of its era, and there are places where the contemporary operator reader needs to apply some friction. The most obvious is what Knight calls the butt faces. These were the regular off-site meetings of his executive team, mostly held in coastal Oregon, mostly involving heavy drinking, occasional shouting, almost no formal structure, and what Knight portrays as a kind of brotherly chaos that produced extraordinary results. The butt faces have become, in business culture, a kind of touchstone, the example everyone cites for why management theory is overrated, and why a tight group of weird, loyal friends can outperform any organizational chart. Read carefully, though, the butt face culture was a product of conditions that no contemporary founder can replicate. It was a small group of mostly white, mostly male, mostly former athletes working in an era before human resources existed as a function, before employment law looked anything like it does now, and inside a company that was small enough that everyone could fit around one table. Knight himself acknowledges, late in the book, that the same culture would not have scaled. By the time Nike had thousands of employees, the butt faces were a relic. The structure was no longer the structure. Importing the butt face model into a modern company is, mostly, a form of nostalgia. The lesson worth taking is not the model. The lesson worth taking is that Knight hired people he genuinely loved working with, and then he mostly left them alone. That is not a management framework. That is a principle, and it travels. The butt face meetings, with their specific rituals, do not. A second place where the book shows its age is in its treatment of debt and cash management. Knight is, throughout the book, somewhere between cavalier and proud about how close he danced to insolvency. The repeated near misses with the Bank of California, the cash flow management that, in places, reads like financial fiction. These were possible in part because the regulatory environment was different. They were possible in part because the relationship between small businesses and banks was less computerized, less standardized, more dependent on personal judgment. A founder today attempting Knight's working capital improvisations would find herself in legal trouble far faster than Knight did. And there is a third place worth naming. Knight, particularly in the early chapters, has a habit of describing women in ways that range from awkward to dismissive. His mother is a saint. His wife is patient. His female employees are largely absent from the narrative. Penny Knight, his wife, kept the books of the company in the early years. She managed the cash. She was, in any meaningful operational sense, a co-founder. The book gives her a few warm pages and then largely loses her. This is worth naming, not to score points against a man writing in his 70s about his 20s, but because it changes how the reader understands the operational story. The chaos Knight describes was made survivable, repeatedly, by people he does not fully credit. None of this is a reason to discount the book. It is a reason to read it with calibrated attention. Knight is telling the story he remembers. Some of what he remembers is incomplete. Return to the thesis. Nike was not a triumph of passion. It was a triumph of supplier financing. What does that actually mean for a founder reading Shoe Dog today? It means that the most consequential decision Knight made in the first decade of his business was not which shoes to sell, or how to design the swoosh, or whether to name the company Nike or Dimension 6. The most consequential decision was who would carry his working capital. And the answer, for a long time, was a Japanese trading company that operated by rules Knight did not fully understand and could not directly control. This is the worldview underneath the tactics. Knight did not bootstrap, in the way that word is used in contemporary startup discourse. He did not finance his growth from his own profits. He could not. The arithmetic of his business did not permit it. What he did instead was construct a network of relationships in which the gap between revenue and cash was absorbed by counterparties whose interests, for a period of time, aligned with his survival. The conventional reading misses this because the conventional reading is in love with the founder as protagonist. Knight, in this telling, is the hero who refuses to quit, who outlasts the bank, who believes in the product when no one else will. And all of that is true. But it is also true that he was carried, for years, by a balance sheet that was not his. The hero story is real. So is the structural story underneath it. Founders today, particularly in software companies, often miss this because their businesses do not look like Nike's. They do not have inventory. They do not have letters of credit. They do not have a Japanese trading partner financing their import operations. So they read Shoe Dog and they take the emotional lessons, the grit, the crazy idea, the friends who stayed. But the structural lesson translates. Every business has counterparties. A software as a service company has cloud infrastructure providers who effectively extend credit by billing in arrears. It has annual prepay customers who finance the next year of development. It has venture capital firms whose money is, in a real sense, a structured bet against future revenue. It has employees who accept stock instead of cash and thereby finance the gap between current burn and future value. The forms change. The structure does not. Every founder is, at some level, running a working capital business. The question is, which counterparty is carrying the float? When Knight was 24, he did not know any of this. He learned it by failing for 16 years. The lesson most readers miss is that the failing was the education. The book is not a record of insight. It is a record of accumulation. By the time Knight was running Nike at any meaningful scale, he understood his business as a network of financial relationships, and he understood that the relationships were the business. The shoes were almost incidental. Near the end of the book, Knight reflects on what mattered most to him across all those years. The friendships, the runs at dawn, the conversation with his father late in life. The reflection is heartfelt, and it is the part of the book most often quoted in retrospectives. But the book itself, taken as a whole, is making a more complicated argument. What kept the dream alive long enough to become a company was, in fact, the balance sheet. The thing he could not put on the balance sheet sustained him as a person. The thing he did put on the balance sheet sustained the company. Both are true. The book is generous about the first. It is shy about the second. A few specific recommendations for how to read Shoe Dog differently and how to run your company differently because of it. First, map your counterparties. Sit down with a blank page and list every party that is, in some way, extending you credit. Your suppliers, your cloud providers, your annual contract customers, your tax authority, your landlord, your investors, the people who hold your accounts payable, the people whose accounts receivable you hold. Each of these is a financial relationship, whether or not you call it one. Knight survived because he understood his most important counterparty was not a bank. Yours probably is not either. Second, stop romanticizing being undercapitalized. Knight spent the first 16 years of his company one bad week from bankruptcy. He survived. Most do not. The version of his story that gets retold celebrates the proximity to failure as if it were itself a virtue. It was not. It was a condition Knight survived because he was, in addition to being talented and lucky, extraordinarily good at managing counterparty relationships under extreme pressure. If you can build a runway instead of a near-death experience, do it. Third, hire people whose work you cannot do yourself, and then leave them alone. This is the actual management lesson of Shoe Dog, never stated explicitly. Bowerman invented the shoes. Jeff Johnson built the early culture. Del Hayes ran the numbers. Rob Strasser ran the deals. Bob Waddell ran the operations. Knight's job was to hold the thing together, protect the people doing the work, and keep the counterparty relationships alive. He did not do everyone else's job. He could not have. The company worked because he understood the difference between his role and theirs, and he did not confuse them. Fourth, pay attention to the moment your business stops being a distributor of someone else's value and starts being a brand. For Knight, this moment came when Onitsuka tried to cut him off, and he realized he had to make his own shoes or die. The moment is rarely that dramatic in other companies, but it happens. There is a point in most companies when the value you create stops being the access you provide and starts being the trust you carry. The economics of those two businesses are different. The capital structure is different. The counterparties are different. If you do not notice the transition, you will keep running the old business while the new one needs you. If you found this useful, subscribe. One book a week, no fluff, on the books real operators read. Next week, we are reading Michael Gerber's The E-Myth Revisited, the book that told a generation of small business owners to work on their business, not in it. We are going to argue that Gerber was right, but for the wrong reasons, and that the framework has been misapplied by almost everyone who quotes it. The bookshelf is open. See you Tuesday.